Chicago's tallest tower hides its darkest secrets behind bulletproof glass and billion-dollar lies. Tonight, a federal undercover agent will walk into the penthouse office of the city's most dangerous billionaire, a man rumored to control an invisible criminal empire, and discover the one truth that could destroy them both. He's not the monster everyone thinks he is, but someone wants him buried anyway, and she's the weapon they're using to do it. If you want to see how love becomes the most dangerous investigation of all, stay until the very end. Hit that like button now and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. Check. The elevator to the 47th floor didn't make a sound. Simone Veyr noticed that first. The unnatural silence. The way her own breathing seemed too loud inside the polished steel cage, climbing through Blackmere Tower's core. Outside the glass walls, Chicago sprawled beneath her in grids of amber and shadow, a city that never stopped moving even when it pretended to sleep. Her reflection stared back at her. Tailored charcoal blazer, hair pulled tight, expression carefully blank. 29 years old, and she'd already perfected the art of looking like she belonged in rooms designed to exclude people like her. Southside raised, scholarship educated, federal trained. The portfolio in her hands felt heavier than it should. Vesper Global Holdings, executive secretary position, six-figure salary, corner office access, and a direct line to Lucien Veyr, the man the covert financial crimes unit had been hunting for 3 years without ever getting close enough to touch. The elevator chimed. Simone stepped out into a reception area that looked like it cost more than her childhood home. Floor-to-ceiling windows, midnight marble, furniture sharp enough to cut. A young man sat behind a glass desk, his suit probably worth a month of her actual salary, his eyes already sizing her up with the kind of cold assessment she recognized from every dangerous place she'd ever worked. "Ms. Veyr?" "That's right." He stood smoothly. "Mr. Veyr's expecting you. Follow me." They moved through halls where even the air felt expensive, climate-controlled, subtly scented, utterly sterile. Other employees passed without making eye contact, their movements efficient and silent. No laughter, no casual conversation, just the hum of power running through walls that had seen more money move through them in a day than most people earned in a lifetime. The man stopped at a door made of dark wood and steel. "He doesn't like to be kept waiting," he said quietly. Then he knocked twice and pushed it open. Simone walked inside. The office stretched out like a cathedral to controlled ambition, minimalist, brutal, and absolutely precise. One wall was pure glass overlooking the city. The others held nothing but shadow and perfectly placed lighting. A single desk sat in the center, black lacquer and clean lines, with exactly 3 items on its surface: a laptop, a pen, and a file folder she recognized immediately. Her fake resume. Behind the desk stood Lucien Veyr. He didn't look up right away. 35, lean in the way men get when they forget to eat, because they're too focused on surviving, wearing a suit that fit him like a second skin. Black hair, sharp jaw, hands resting flat on the desk, hands that carried faint scars across the knuckles, the kind you didn't get from boardroom negotiations. When he finally lifted his gaze, Simone felt the air tighten. Dark eyes. Unreadable. Intelligent enough to be dangerous. "Ms. Veyr." His voice was quiet, controlled, the kind of calm that made you forget how much damage silence could do. "Sit." She sat. Lucien remained standing, studying her with the patience of a man who had learned to see through every lie before it fully formed. The folder stayed closed between them. "You have an impressive background," he said. "Columbia MBA, 3 years at Ernst & Young, fluent in Mandarin and Korean, impeccable references." "Thank you." "All of it recently created." Simone's pulse spiked, but her expression didn't move. Lucien leaned forward slightly, bracing his hands on the desk. "I'm going to ask you one question, Ms. Veyr. Answer it honestly and we can proceed. Lie to me and you'll be escorted out of this building within 60 seconds. She met his stare without blinking. "Who sent you?" The room felt like it was shrinking. Simone had prepared for this. 6 weeks of rehearsal, constructed identity, fabricated employment history detailed enough to survive deep background checks. Her handler had assured her the cover was airtight, but Lucien Veyr wasn't looking at her resume. He was looking at her. "No one sent me," she said evenly, I applied for the position because I want to work here. Why? Because Vesper Global is one of the most powerful investment firms in the country, and I'm tired of being underestimated. Lucien's expression didn't change. You grew up on the South Side. Your mother still lives there. Same apartment, same address for 22 years. You put yourself through community college before transferring to state school on a merit scholarship. The Columbia MBA is real, but you graduated in the bottom third of your class because you were working 2 jobs to pay down loans. Ice slid down Simone's spine. Everything about you is real, Lucien continued softly, which makes you exactly the kind of person someone would use as a weapon. So I'll ask again. Who sent you into my building? Simone's mind raced through options. Deny, deflect, attack. But something about the way he was watching her killed every tactical response before it formed. He already knew. Not the specifics, maybe. But he knew someone had placed her here. So she made a choice. A federal financial crimes task force, she said quietly. They believe Vesper Global is a front for organized criminal activity tied to a Korean-American syndicate that supposedly collapsed years ago. They think you inherited it. They sent me here to gather evidence. The silence that followed felt like falling. Then Lucien did something she didn't expect. He smiled. Not warmth, not humor, just a brief, bitter acknowledgement of something inevitable. Finally, he said, someone honest. He straightened, walked to the window, and stared out at Chicago like he was looking for something he'd lost a long time ago. The syndicate was real, he said. My father built it. Spent 30 years turning desperation into power because that's what you did if you were an immigrant in this city, and survival wasn't guaranteed. He moved money, controlled territory, made people disappear when they threatened what he built. And when he was dying, he expected me to take over. Simone stayed perfectly still. But I didn't. Lucien's voice remained flat, emotionless. I spent the last 3 years quietly dismantling everything he created. Every shell company, every offshore account, every connection to violence. Vesper Global isn't hiding a criminal empire, Ms. Veyr. It's burying one. He turned back to face her. So your handlers are half right. This building does hold evidence of organized crime, just not the way they think. Simone's throat felt dry. Why are you telling me this? Because whoever sent you doesn't actually want justice. Lucien's eyes locked onto hers. They want leverage, and you're going to help me figure out who they're working for. You want me to be a double agent. I want you to do your job. He moved closer, each step deliberate. Investigate. Gather evidence. Send your reports. But do it honestly. If you find proof I'm running criminal operations, turn me in. If you find proof I'm not. He stopped less than 3 feet away. Then, we're going to burn down whoever's trying to use federal resources to destroy something they don't understand. Simone's heart was hammering now. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, a manipulation, a carefully constructed lie designed to turn her into exactly what he needed. But she'd spent 6 weeks studying Lucien Veyr, and the man standing in front of her didn't match the file. How do I know you're telling the truth? She asked. You don't. His expression remained unreadable. But you're about to spend every day inside this building with full access to financial records, communication logs, and operational documents. You'll see everything, and then you'll decide whether I'm the monster they told you I was. He extended his hand. Welcome to Vesper Global, Ms. Veyr. Simone stared at his hand for 3 long seconds. Then she shook it. His grip was firm, scarred, and somehow colder than the glass walls surrounding them. When he released her, he returned to his desk and opened the folder. Your first assignment, he said, pulling out a document, is to audit this transaction history. I need discrepancies identified by end of business tomorrow. Simone took the paper. Her hands were steady even though her mind was screaming. Understood. One more thing. She looked up. Lucien's dark eyes held hers with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. If you betray me, Ms. Veyr, you'll wish the federal government had found me first. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Simone nodded once and walked out of his office with her pulse pounding in her ears and no idea whether she'd just made the smartest decision of her career or signed her own execution warrant. The weeks that followed broke every rule Simone had been taught about undercover operations. She was supposed to observe from a distance, Gather intelligence quietly, avoid personal entanglement. Instead, Lucien put her in the center of everything. Morning briefings where he dissected international market movements with surgical precision. Afternoon meetings where venture capital predators circled like sharks, and Lucien dismantled their proposals with 3 sentences. Late nights reviewing acquisition documents while Chicago glittered 47 floors below, and coffee turned into something stronger. He never treated her like a secretary. He treated her like a weapon he was sharpening. Read this. He'd toss her a contract mid-meeting. Tell me where they're hiding the liability. Or, the Seoul office sent these projections. They're lying. Find out why. Or most dangerously, that investor wants to buy into our Eastern European portfolio. He's connected to human trafficking networks. Prove it before Friday so I can destroy him publicly. Simone started working 18-hour days. Not because Lucien demanded it, though he worked longer, but because every document she reviewed confirmed exactly what he told her that first day. Vesper Global wasn't laundering money. It was tracking it. Every shell company led back to the original criminal infrastructure his father had built. And every transaction was a carefully documented step toward legitimate dissolution. Offshore accounts weren't hiding assets. They were creating paper trails for federal seizure. Partnership agreements weren't criminal conspiracies. They were strategic dismantlements. Lucien Veyr was turning his inheritance into evidence, and someone wanted him destroyed for it. Simone sent her reports to her handler, Adrian Cross, every 72 hours. His responses grew more aggressive each time. Need partner lists, get access to private communications. We need leverage on his inner circle. He never asked what the evidence actually showed. He just wanted more. Simone started feeling sick every time she hit send. Meanwhile, Lucien's second-in-command watched her like a predator studying prey. Cale Arden was tall, silent, and terrifying in the way men become when violence stops being a choice and becomes reflex. He'd been with Lucien since the beginning, since before Vesper Global existed, and his loyalty was absolute. He also clearly didn't trust her. You ask a lot of questions, Cale said one evening when he found her alone in the archive room reviewing acquisition files. Simone didn't look up. That's my job. Your job is executive administration. Lucien gave me broader access. I know. Cale moved closer, his presence filling the space like smoke. What I don't know is why. She met his stare directly. Ask him. I did. Cale's expression remained flat. He said you're useful, but useful doesn't mean safe. Then watch me, Simone said coldly. I'm not hiding anything. Cale studied her for a long moment, then walked away without another word. But after that, he was always there. In peripheral vision, around corners, 3 steps behind during building evacuations, watching. The suffocation should have been unbearable. Instead, Simone started noticing other things, like the way Lucien's expression changed when he thought no one was watching. Exhaustion bleeding through the control, something hollow and unreachable flickering behind his eyes before he locked it away again. Or the scars on his hands that occasionally caught lamplight during late meetings. Defensive wounds. Old ones. Or the private phone calls he took in Korean at 2 a.m, voice dropping into something raw and unguarded before he ended them and became stone again. He was carrying something that was killing him slowly, and Simone couldn't stop wanting to understand what it was. The shift happened during a quarterly investor presentation. Lucien stood at the head of a conference table surrounded by men who measured their worth in zeros and treated other humans like chess pieces. He walked them through Vesper's performance with ruthless efficiency, 30% returns, strategic market positioning, flawless risk management. Then one investor, a silver-haired predator named Marcus Holt, leaned back in his chair. Impressive numbers, Veyr, though I hear your father would have doubled them. The room went silent. Lucien's expression didn't change. My father also destroyed lives for profit. I prefer sustainable growth. Marcus smiled. Sustainable is just another word for soft. No, Lucien said quietly. Sustainable means I won't be dead or imprisoned by 40. If that's soft, I'll take it. Marcus's smile died. The meeting ended 10 minutes later with every investor renewing their commitments and Marcus Holt leaving without another word. Simone waited until the room cleared before speaking. You didn't have to defend yourself. Lucien was gathering documents, movements precise. I wasn't defending. I was clarifying. He was baiting you. I know. Lucien finally looked at her. Men like Marcus built fortunes by making other men prove themselves through escalation. I'm not interested in proving anything. Then why do this at all? Simone gestured at the building around them. Why not walk away from all of it? Because walking away means someone else takes over. His voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before. And the next person won't dismantle it. They'll weaponize it. He moved toward the door, then stopped. You're wondering if I'm lying to you, he said without turning around. If this is all performance, if I'm really the monster they warned you about. Simone's breath caught. I wonder the same thing sometimes, Lucien continued softly. Whether I'm actually different from my father, or just better at hiding it. Then he walked out, leaving Simone alone with a question she couldn't answer and a fear she couldn't name. Everything changed at midnight on a Wednesday. Simone was alone in her office, reviewing encrypted transaction logs when her personal phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then instinct made her pick up. Ms. Veyr? The voice was male, smooth, unfamiliar. We should talk about your employer. Ice flooded her veins. Who is this? Someone who knows what you're really doing inside Blackmere Tower, and someone who can prove Lucien Veyr is exactly what the federal government thinks he is. Simone's hand tightened on the phone. I'm hanging up. Your mother still lives at 4721 South Ashland, apartment 3B. She leaves for her nursing shift at 6:30 every morning, walks 4 blocks to the bus stop, usually alone. The world stopped. If you touch her, we won't, the voice said calmly. As long as you do exactly what we tell you. Simone couldn't breathe. There's a file on Veyr's private server, the man continued. Partnership agreements with Eastern European arms dealers. We need you to copy it and send it to this number within 72 hours. Do that, and your mother stays safe. Refuse, and... The line went dead. Not disconnected. Ended. Simone stared at her phone, pulse roaring in her ears, mind racing through every tactical option and finding nothing but walls. Then her office door opened. Lucien stood in the threshold, still wearing his suit from earlier, eyes sharp despite the hour. You're working late, he said. Simone's voice came out steady through sheer force of will. So are you. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. I saw your light on. Thought you might want coffee. He set a cup on her desk. Black, no sugar, exactly how she took it, and she realized with sudden, terrible clarity that he'd been paying attention to details so small she hadn't noticed them herself. Thank you, she managed. Lucien leaned against the wall, studying her with that unreadable expression that made her feel like he could see straight through skin and bone into the panic eating her alive from the inside. Something's wrong, he said quietly. I'm fine. You're lying. Simone met his gaze. Maybe I'm just tired. You don't look tired. You look afraid. The accuracy of it hit like a blade. Lucien pushed off the wall and moved closer, each step deliberate. He stopped just at the edge of her desk, close enough that she could see the faint shadows under his eyes, and the way tension held his shoulders rigid despite the controlled exterior. If someone threatened you, he said, voice dropping lower, I need to know. Simone's hands were shaking now. She pressed them flat against her thighs under the desk where he couldn't see. Why? The word came out sharper than she intended. Why would you care? Something flickered across Lucien's face, surprise maybe, or recognition, before the mask snapped back into place. Because you work for me, he said. But the way he was looking at her had nothing to do with professional responsibility. It was possession, raw, undeniable, and absolutely terrifying. Simone stood abruptly, needing distance, needing air, needing to think through the chaos screaming in her head. I should go home. It's almost 1 a.m. Then I should have left hours ago. She grabbed her bag and moved toward the door, but Lucien stepped into her path, not blocking, just present. If you're in danger, Ms. Veyr, running won't fix it. And staying here will? She hated how her voice cracked. Yes. The single word hung between them like a vow. Simone looked up at him, at this man she'd been sent to destroy. This man who might be exactly what her handlers claimed, or might be the only person in Chicago actually trying to build something honest, and felt the ground dissolve beneath her feet. "I don't know who to trust anymore," she whispered. Lucien's expression softened just slightly. "Then don't trust anyone, just survive until you figure it out." He stepped aside. Simone walked past him, through the door, down the empty hallway toward the elevator. When she reached it and turned back, Lucien was still standing in the doorway of her office, watching her with dark eyes that held too many questions and not enough answers. The elevator doors closed between them, and Simone rode down through 47 floors of steel and glass, while her phone burned like a threat in her pocket, and 72 hours ticked down toward a choice she couldn't make. Simone didn't sleep. She sat in her apartment, a studio in Logan Square that cost too much and felt too small, staring at her phone while Chicago's pre-dawn traffic hummed through thin walls and the 72-hour countdown carved itself into her bones. 4721 South Ashland, Apartment 3B. Her mother's address burned behind her eyes like a brand. The file they wanted was real. She'd seen references to it during her third week, partnership documentation stored on Lucien's private server, encrypted so heavily she'd need his direct access codes to retrieve it. At the time, she'd noted it for her reports, but couldn't justify the risk of trying to breach his personal security. Now someone was forcing her hand, and the worst part, the part that made her want to put her fist through the wall, was that she still didn't know if Lucien deserved it. 3 weeks of total access. 3 weeks of watching him dismantle his father's empire piece by piece. 3 weeks of evidence that pointed toward redemption instead of corruption. But evidence could be fabricated. Men like Lucien didn't survive by being honest. They survived by being better liars than everyone else. Her phone buzzed at 5:47 a.m. Adrian Cross. Check in. Status update required. Simone's jaw tightened. She'd been sending reports every 72 hours like clockwork, detailed intelligence about Vesper's operations, partner networks, financial structures. Adrian absorbed it all without comment, never questioning the pattern she was documenting, never acknowledging that nothing she sent looked like criminal activity. He just kept demanding more. She typed back, "On schedule, gaining deeper access." His response came instantly, "Good. We need something concrete within the week. Pressure's building." Simone stared at those words, "Pressure's building," and felt something cold settle in her chest. Pressure from who? Federal investigations didn't work on arbitrary deadlines unless someone external was pushing the timeline. Unless this wasn't really about justice. Unless Lucien had been right from the beginning. She dragged herself into the shower, let scalding water beat against her shoulders until her skin turned red, then dressed in the same armor she wore every day, tailored suit, pulled back hair, expression blank enough to hide the war screaming inside her skull. By 7:30, she was walking into Blackmere Tower. By 8, she was sitting at her desk, pretending everything was normal, while her mother's address pulsed like a second heartbeat, and 48 hours dissolved into nothing. Lucien called her into his office at 9. Simone walked through the door expecting another assignment, another document to dissect, another test of whether she could keep lying while standing 3 feet away from him. Instead, she found him standing at the window with his back to the room, shoulders rigid beneath expensive fabric, one hand braced against the glass like he was holding himself upright through pure will. "Close the door," he said without turning around. She did. The silence stretched until it became its own kind of violence. Then Lucien spoke, voice rougher than she'd ever heard it. "Kael thinks you're going to betray me." Simone's pulse spiked, but she kept her voice level. "What do you think?" "I think Kael's usually right." He turned finally, and the exhaustion in his face hit her like a physical blow. He looked like he'd been awake for days, shadows carved deep beneath his eyes, tension bleeding through the control, something desperate flickering in his expression before he locked it down. "But I also think," he continued slowly, "that if you were going to destroy me, you would have done it already. Maybe I'm just being patient." "No." Lucien moved closer, each step deliberate. "Patient would be efficient. You're not being efficient, Ms. Veyr. You're being thorough, which means you're actually trying to find the truth instead of just confirming what you've been told to believe." He stopped less than 2 feet away. "So I'm going to give you something no one else has." Simone's throat felt tight. "What?" Complete access. He pulled a keycard from his pocket. Black, unmarked, heavy. My private server, every file, every communication, every piece of evidence you could possibly need to either clear me or bury me. He held it out. Simone stared at the card like it was a loaded gun. Why? Because I'm tired, Lucien said quietly. Tired of carrying this alone, tired of wondering who's going to be the one to finally put a knife in my back, and tired of pretending I don't know you're the most dangerous person I've ever let this close. His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. So take it. Do your job. And when you're done, tell me honestly whether I'm worth saving or whether I should have died with my father's empire 3 years ago. Simone's hand moved before her brain caught up. She took the card. It felt like signing a contract written in blood. Lucien's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. Relief, maybe, or resignation, before he walked back to his desk and picked up a file like the last 60 seconds hadn't just rewritten every rule between them. That's all, he said. You can go. Simone turned toward the door, the keycard burning in her palm. Then she stopped. Lucien? He looked up, and she realized it was the first time she'd used his name without the formal distance of Mr. Veyr. If I find something, she said carefully, if there's proof you're lying about all of this, I will turn you in. I know. But if you're telling the truth, then you'll have a choice to make about who's really pulling your strings. His voice remained flat. And I hope for both our sakes you choose correctly. Simone walked out before her resolve could crack. She waited until midnight. The building emptied slowly after dark. Analysts, assistants, executives bleeding away floor by floor until only the core remained. Kyle left at 11, his final glance toward her office sharp enough to draw blood. The security team rotated shifts at 11:30. At 11:45, Simone was alone. She pulled out the keycard, stared at it under the desk lamp's harsh light, then slid it into her laptop's reader. The private server opened like a vault. Thousands of files. Years of documentation. Partnership agreements, communication logs, financial transfers, operational records. Everything Lucien had promised, and more. Simone started reading. An hour later, her hands were shaking. 2 hours later, she'd stopped breathing normally. By 3 a.m., she wanted to scream, because every single document confirmed exactly what Lucien had told her. His father's empire hadn't collapsed. It had been systematically dismantled from the inside. Shell companies dissolved through careful legal maneuvering, offshore accounts transferred to federal seizure protocols, criminal partnerships terminated with surgical precision and documented evidence trails. Even the partnership agreements with Eastern European contacts that the anonymous caller had mentioned weren't arms deals. They were intelligence exchanges. Lucien had been feeding information to Interpol for 2 years. He wasn't hiding a criminal network. He was building the case that would destroy it forever, and someone wanted him dead for it. Simone's phone buzzed, unknown number. She answered with her heart in her throat. 48 hours, Ms. Veyr. I hope you're not wasting time. I'm working on it, she said hoarsely. Work faster. Your mother's bus route takes her past some very dangerous neighborhoods. It would be terrible if something happened. The line went dead. Simone sat in the darkness surrounded by evidence of Lucien's innocence and felt the trap close around her with perfect, terrible precision. Because she couldn't give them the file. It would destroy an innocent man. But she couldn't refuse. It would kill her mother. And she couldn't go to Lucien for help, because admitting the threat meant admitting she'd been compromised from the beginning. She was alone. Completely, utterly alone. Then her office door opened. Simone's head snapped up, adrenaline flooding her system, hand already moving toward the letter opener on her desk. Lucie stood in the threshold, still dressed, still awake, eyes locked on her laptop screen where his private files were spread across the display like an autopsy. You're thorough, he said quietly. Simone couldn't speak. He walked inside and closed the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a cell locking. Find what you needed? Her voice came out wrecked. Why are you here? Because I knew you'd use the access tonight. Lucien moved closer, exhaustion and something sharper bleeding through his control. And I knew once you did, you'd have to make a choice you weren't ready for. He stopped at the edge of her desk. So I'm going to ask you directly, Ms. Vale. Who threatened you yesterday? Simone's breath caught. What? You've been compromised. It wasn't a question. Someone's forcing you to act against your judgment. I saw it in your face the moment you walked in this morning. You're paranoid. I'm observant. His voice dropped lower. And I know what fear looks like when it's wrapped around someone's throat tight enough to strangle. Simone stood abruptly, needing distance, needing air, needing him to stop looking at her like he could see straight through every defense she'd ever built. This was a mistake, she said. They threatened your mother. The words hit like a gunshot. Simone went absolutely still. Lucien's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes carried something close to fury. Apartment 3B, South Ashland, morning bus route. I'm guessing they gave you a deadline and demanded access to specific files in exchange for her safety. Simone's hands were shaking now. How did you? Because it's exactly what I would do if I wanted to force someone's hand. His jaw tightened. And because Kael's been tracking surveillance on your mother's building since Tuesday, someone's been watching her. The world tilted. You've been protecting her? Simone's voice cracked. Why? Because the moment you walked into this building, you became a liability someone would eventually try to exploit. Lucien moved around the desk, closing the distance between them with deliberate precision. And because despite everything, despite knowing you were sent here to destroy me, I wasn't going to let them hurt you to get to me. He stopped close enough that she could see the faint scars on his knuckles and the way his hands were clenched into fists like he was physically restraining himself from doing something irreversible. So here's what's going to happen, he said quietly. You're going to tell me exactly what they want. I'm going to give it to them. And then we're going to burn down whoever's using federal resources to run extortion. You can't. I can. His voice carried absolute certainty. Because unlike them, I'm not afraid of consequences anymore. Simone stared at him, at this man who should be her enemy, who should be everything her training taught her to destroy, and felt every wall she'd built crack straight down the center. They want the Eastern European Partnership file, she whispered. 48 hours, or they hurt her. Lucien's expression went cold. That file doesn't contain what they think it does. I know, I read it. Then you know giving it to them won't save anyone. It'll just give them ammunition to twist the truth into whatever narrative they're selling. So what do I do? The question came out desperate. Let them kill my mother? No. Lucien's eyes locked onto hers. You trust me. I don't even know you. Yes, you do. His voice dropped to something raw and unguarded. You've spent 3 weeks reading every decision I've made, every sacrifice I've chosen, every piece of my father's legacy I've destroyed to build something that won't leave blood on the ground. You know exactly who I am, Ms. Vale. He reached up slowly, carefully, and touched her face with scarred fingers that should have felt threatening, but somehow didn't. The question is whether you're brave enough to believe it. Simone's breath came in shallow gasps. Her pulse was hammering. Every instinct screamed that this was manipulation, strategy, another move in a game she'd never fully understand. But when she looked into Lucien's eyes, she didn't see calculation. She saw exhaustion, desperation, and something that looked dangerously close to hope. What do you need me to do? She asked. Lucien's hand dropped from her face. Give me 12 hours, he said. Don't contact your handlers. Don't respond to threats. Just trust that I'm not going to let anything happen to your mother. And then? Then we end this. He turned toward the door. Simone's voice stopped him. Lucien. He looked back. If you're lying to me, if this is all just another way to control the situation, I will destroy you myself. Something that might have been respect flickered across his expression. I'd expect nothing less. Then he walked out, leaving Simone alone with her laptop full of evidence, her phone full of threats, and a choice that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff with no idea whether the ground below was solid or just another carefully painted illusion. He checks. The next 12 hours moved like drowning in slow motion. Simone went home at 4 a.m., collapsed into bed without undressing, and woke 3 hours later to 17 missed calls. 10 from unknown numbers, 7 from Adrian Cross. Her hands were shaking when she finally called him back. Where the hell have you been? Adrian's voice came through sharp, with an edge she'd never heard before. Working, Simone said carefully. Late night at the office. I need that status update, now. I'm still gathering. You've had 3 weeks, Veyr. 3 weeks of total access, and all you're sending me is financial documentation that looks clean. I need dirt, real evidence, something I can actually use. The phrasing hit wrong. Something I can use, not something we can prosecute, not evidence of criminal activity, something Adrian could personally weaponize. I'm doing everything I can, Simone said slowly, but if the evidence doesn't exist, It exists, Adrian's voice went cold. Lucien Veyr is exactly what we think he is. You're just not looking hard enough. Or maybe he's not. Don't. The single word cracked like a whip. Don't start sympathizing with the target. I've seen it happen before and it never ends well. Simone's jaw tightened. I'm not sympathizing. I'm reporting what I'm finding. Then find something better. Adrian's tone shifted into something that made her skin crawl. Because if you can't deliver results, Veyr, I'll have to consider whether you're still the right asset for this operation. The threat hung in the air like poison. Understood, Simone said. She ended the call before he could say anything else. Then she sat on her bed staring at her phone and felt the last piece of her cover story disintegrate. Adrian Cross wasn't building a case. He was building leverage, and she'd been his tool from the very beginning. Simone walked into Blackmere Tower at 9, expecting chaos. Instead, she found Lucien in his office conducting a video conference with sole investors like nothing had changed. Kael stood in the corner watching her with that same predatory assessment. The building hummed with its usual controlled efficiency. But when the meeting ended and the office cleared, Lucien looked at her with exhausted eyes and said only 2 words. It's done. What's done? He pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. Her mother. Safe. Sitting in a protected federal safe house with 2 U.S. Marshals standing guard. Simone's knees almost gave out. How? I made some calls. Lucien's voice remained flat. People who owe me favors. Your mother will stay under protection until this is resolved. And the people threatening her? Being handled. Kael spoke from the corner, voice like gravel. We have their identities, their locations, and enough evidence of extortion and corruption to bury them permanently. Simone looked between them, these 2 men who existed in shadows she was only beginning to understand, and felt reality tilt sideways. You did this in 12 hours? We've been preparing for something like this for months, Lucien said. The moment Kael flagged surveillance on your mother's building, we knew someone was escalating. We just needed to know who and what they wanted. You used me as bait. I gave you a choice. His eyes locked onto hers. And you chose to trust me. Simone's hands were shaking, rage and relief and terror all fighting for dominance. What happens now? Lucien stood, walked to the window, stared out at Chicago like he was calculating the cost of whatever came next. Now you contact your handler, he said quietly. Tell him you have the file he wants. Set up a meeting to deliver it in person. But the file will be exactly what he's expecting. Lucien turned back. Except every piece of it will be documented as an illegal intelligence request made under false federal authority. When he takes it, he'll be confirming conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, and abuse of government resources. Kael smiled without warmth. We'll have everything recorded. Simone's mind raced through the implications. You're building a counter case. I'm building protection, Lucien corrected, because the moment your handler realizes you're not controllable anymore, he's going to try to destroy both of us. So we destroy him first. He moved closer. But I need you to decide, Ms. Veyr, right now. Are you still working for Adrian Cross, or are you working with me? The question hung between them like a blade. Every instinct Simone had been trained to follow screamed that this was wrong, that federal agents didn't conspire with their targets, that justice didn't happen through backroom counterintelligence, that she was crossing a line there'd be no coming back from. But she'd already crossed it. The moment she took Lucien's keycard, the moment she read his files, the moment she looked into his exhausted eyes and saw something honest staring back. She'd stopped investigating Lucien Veyr and started believing him. Tell me what to do, she said. Tight. The meeting was set for Friday at noon in Millennium Park. Public space, cars, cameras everywhere, witnesses in every direction. Adrian wanted her to bring the file on a flash drive, hand it over during a casual walk, act like nothing was wrong. Instead, Simone wore a wire. Kael had given it to her that morning, so small she could barely feel it against her skin. Sophisticated enough to transmit directly to 3 separate recording locations, including a federal prosecutor's office that Lucien had spent 2 days convincing to listen. Don't improvise, Kael had warned her. Get him to confirm what he wants and why. Then get out. Now she stood near the Cloudgate sculpture, watching tourists take selfies while her pulse hammered and every nerve screamed that this was a trap she'd walked into voluntarily. Adrian appeared at 12:03. He looked exactly like he always did. Mid-40s, sharp suit, expression carefully neutral. Except today she could see the predator underneath the federal agent disguise. Veyr. He stopped beside her, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the crowd. You have it? Simone pulled out a flash drive. Everything you asked for. Adrian took it without looking at her. Good. This should be enough. Enough for what? His eyes cut toward her. To close the case. The case? Simone repeated slowly. Or to sell the intelligence to whoever's paying more than the government? Adrian went absolutely still. Then he smiled. It was the coldest thing Simone had ever seen. You've been spending too much time with Veyr, he said quietly. Starting to think like a criminal. I'm thinking like someone who finally understands who the real criminal is. Careful, Veyr. Adrian's voice dropped into something dangerous. You're not as untouchable as you think. Neither are you. His hand moved toward his jacket, and Simone's entire body tensed. But he just pulled out his phone. This conversation is over, Adrian said. You did your job. Walk away before you make it worse. I can't. Why not? Because you threatened to hurt my mother. Simone's voice came out steady despite the fear screaming through her veins. Because you've been using federal resources to build private intelligence packages you're selling to criminal networks. Because everything you told me about Lucien Veyr was a lie designed to turn me into a weapon against an innocent man. Adrian's expression went flat. You can't prove any of that. Actually, a new voice said, she can. Lucien stepped into view from behind the sculpture, Kael flanking him, both dressed like they'd come straight from a board meeting. Adrian's face drained of color. Mr. Cross. Lucien's voice remained perfectly controlled. I believe you've been looking for evidence of criminal activity. Allow me to help. He pulled out his own phone and played an audio recording. Adrian's voice came through crystal clear. I need that status update, something I can use. If you can't deliver results, I'll have to consider whether you're still the right asset. Then another recording, a different conversation. Adrian speaking to someone else entirely. The Veyr intelligence is worth at least $2 million to the right buyer. Veyl's getting close. Once she delivers, we move. The blood rushed from Adrian's face. That's illegal surveillance. No, Kael said flatly. That's evidence of conspiracy. Obtained through legal channels after we flagged your extortion attempts to federal oversight. Adrian looked around wildly, at the tourists, at the cameras, at the trap closing around him with surgical precision. Then he ran. He made it 15 feet before U.S. Marshals materialized from the crowd and took him down hard against the pavement. Simone watched them cuff him, read him his rights, drag him toward a waiting vehicle, while tourists filmed on their phones and Chicago kept moving like violence was just part of the landscape. Then her knees gave out. Lucien caught her before she hit the ground, his arms wrapped around her shoulders, solid and steady, holding her upright while everything she'd been carrying for 3 weeks finally broke through the surface. You're okay, he said quietly against her hair. You're safe. It's done. But Simone couldn't stop shaking, because she'd just destroyed her entire career, burned her federal cover, chosen a criminal target over her own government, and the worst part was she couldn't bring herself to regret it. What happens now? She whispered. Lucien's arms tightened slightly. Now, he said, you decide whether you're ready to survive what comes next. Simone pulled back enough to look at him, at this man she'd been sent to destroy and ended up saving, and saw her own exhaustion reflected in his dark eyes. Together, she said. It wasn't a question. It was a vow. And when Lucien kissed her right there in the middle of Millennium Park with tourists and cameras and federal agents surrounding them, Simone kissed him back and felt every carefully constructed wall she'd ever built finally collapse into honest, terrifying truth. They were both weapons that had been aimed at the wrong targets. But maybe, just maybe, they could forge themselves into something else, something that didn't require lies to survive, even if the world burned them for trying. The federal building smelled like old coffee and institutional disinfect. Simone sat in a windowless interrogation room, not as a suspect technically, but the metal table and recording equipment made the distinction feel meaningless, while two internal affairs investigators reviewed her statement for the third time in 6 hours. She'd told them everything: the undercover assignment, Adrian Cross's escalating demands, the threats against her mother, Lucien's evidence of federal corruption, the wire recording that had captured Adrian confirming his intention to sell classified intelligence. Every word was true. Every word made her sound guilty. "Let me make sure I understand," the older investigator said, his voice carrying the flat exhaustion of someone who'd seen too many careers implode. "You maintained an intimate relationship with your surveillance target while conducting an active federal investigation. It wasn't intimate until after I discovered Adrian was compromised," Simone said for the 4th time. "But you didn't report Adrian's compromise through proper channels. You went directly to the target, because Adrian had threatened my mother and I didn't know who else in the unit might be involved." The younger investigator leaned forward. "Ms. Veyr, do you understand how this looks? A federal agent develops feelings for her target, then helps him build a case against her supervisor using evidence that conveniently exonerates the target of all criminal activity." Simone's hands were clenched so tight under the table, her knuckles ached. "The evidence speaks for itself." "Evidence Lucien Veyr provided," the older man said. "Evidence you can't independently verify because you obtained it while operating outside federal oversight." The trap closed with surgical precision. They weren't questioning whether Adrian was guilty. His own recordings had already buried him. They were questioning whether Simone had compromised the entire investigation through personal involvement, making every piece of evidence inadmissible and giving Lucien exactly the protection he needed. "I need a lawyer," Simone said quietly. Both investigators exchanged glances. "That's probably smart," the older one said. They left her alone in the room with nothing but fluorescent lights and the crushing certainty that she'd destroyed herself trying to do the right thing. Lucien was waiting when she finally walked out 8 hours later. He stood near the building's entrance, wearing the same black suit from that morning, looking like he hadn't moved since she'd been escorted inside for questioning. Kyle flanked him, expression unreadable, hands loose at his sides in a way that suggested immediate violence was always an option. When Lucien saw her, something shifted in his face. Relief, maybe, or recognition of shared exhaustion. "You should have gone home," Simone said. "No." His voice was rough. "I shouldn't have." He moved toward her, and for a moment she thought he might actually embrace her right there in front of federal agents and security cameras and everyone who already believed she'd been compromised beyond repair. But he stopped just at the edge of appropriate distance. "What did they say?" "That I'm suspended pending investigation. That every piece of evidence I gathered while working undercover is now questionable. That Adrian's defense team is going to argue entrapment and illegal surveillance and about 15 other things that might actually stick." Simone's voice cracked. "I destroyed the case trying to save it." "You destroyed a corrupt case," Lucien corrected quietly. "There's a difference. Not one that matters legally." Kale spoke from behind them. "We need to move. This building has too many eyes." Lucien nodded once, then looked at Simone with dark eyes that held too many questions. "Come with us," he said. It wasn't a command. It was an offer. Simone thought about her empty apartment in Logan Square, about her mother in protective custody, about the federal career she'd spent 6 years building now dissolving into ethical review hearings and potential criminal charges. She had nothing left, except maybe the one person who understood exactly what it felt like to survive becoming someone else's weapon. "Okay," she whispered. They took her to a building she'd never seen before. Not Blackmere Tower, not Lucien's penthouse. Somewhere in the West Loop, older construction, Renovated industrial space. Security so subtle she almost missed it until Kael's palm scan unlocked 3 separate doors. Inside was an operations center that made Simone's federal training look like amateur surveillance. Wall-mounted screens displaying real-time financial data, encrypted communication terminals, file servers that probably contained more classified information than half the intelligence agencies in the country. And in the corner, a woman Simone had never met watching everything with cold, analytical precision. "This is Maya So," Lucien said. "She handles our intelligence architecture." Maya stood, late 30s, sharp features, movements economical. "You're the federal agent." "Former federal agent," Simone corrected. "Not yet." Maya's eyes were calculating. "Suspended isn't terminated. You still have access, even if it's limited." Simone looked at Lucien. "What is this place?" "Insurance," he said simply. "When you're dismantling a criminal empire from the inside, you need leverage that exists outside traditional legal structures. This is where we build it." He gestured toward the screens. Adrian Cross wasn't working alone. We've identified at least 4 other federal agents and 6 private intelligence contractors involved in the same operation, selling classified information to criminal networks under the cover of legitimate investigations. "How long have you known?" 2 years. Lucien's voice remained flat. "Since the first time someone tried to use a federal warrant to access Vesper's internal communications. The request came through proper channels, but the follow-up was pure extortion." Maya pulled up a file on the main screen. "We've been documenting everything, building parallel cases, waiting for someone inside the system to be either brave enough or desperate enough to flip." She looked at Simone. "You were the first." The weight of that statement hit like a physical blow. "You've been watching me," Simone said slowly. "Since before I even walked into Blackmere Tower." "Yes." "Then you knew exactly what Adrian was doing. You knew he was using me." "We suspected," Lucien said carefully, "but we needed someone inside who could provide testimony, someone whose credibility would withstand legal scrutiny." Simone's hand started shaking. "So you manipulated me." "I gave you access," Lucien corrected. "Everything else was your choice." "Was it?" Her voice rose. "Because it feels like I was just another asset you needed to control. If I wanted to control you, I would have destroyed Adrian the moment he threatened your mother." Lucien's eyes locked onto hers. "Instead, I gave you the tools to destroy him yourself. There's a difference. The difference is I trusted you. And I trusted you not to send me to prison for crimes I didn't commit." His control finally cracked. "Every document you read, every file you accessed, every report you sent to Adrian, any of that could have been twisted into evidence that buried me permanently. But I let you see everything anyway because the alternative was becoming exactly what my father was. Someone who survived through fear instead of truth." He moved closer, each step deliberate. "So yes, I watched you. I documented your investigation. I prepared for the possibility you'd choose to destroy me. But I never once tried to stop you from making that choice." Simone stared at him. At this man she'd fallen for without permission, without logic, without any of the careful control she'd built her entire career around, and felt something crack open in her chest that hurt worse than any physical wound. "I can't tell the difference anymore," she whispered, "between what's real and what's strategy." Lucien's expression softened just slightly. "Neither can I." The honesty of it was almost unbearable. Kael's voice cut through the tension. "We have a problem." Everyone turned. He was staring at one of the screens, jaw tight, hands clenched into fists. "Adrian made bail 2 hours ago." Maya's fingers flew across the keyboard. "That's impossible. Federal conspiracy charges don't qualify for—" "Someone posted it anyway. $5 million. Cash." The room went silent. Lucien moved to the screen, studied the documentation, then turned with an expression Simone had never seen before. Pure, cold fury. "Who?" he asked quietly. Kael pulled up another file. "The payment came through a shell corporation registered in the Caymans, owned by—" He stopped, looked at Lucien Veyr, said one name that made the air turn to ice. Victor Veyr. Simone didn't understand at first. Then Maya's face drained of color, and Kael stepped back like he'd been struck, and Lucien went absolutely still in a way that suggested violence was the only thing keeping him upright. "Your father," Simone said slowly, "your father's dead." "My father," Lucien said in a voice like broken glass, "has been dead for 3 years. That name belongs to my brother." The world tilted sideways. "You never mentioned a brother." "Because I buried him the same day I buried our father." Lucien's hands were shaking now. Victor was supposed to take over the empire. He wanted it, the power, the fear, the blood. But when our father died, I claimed inheritance rights first and started dismantling everything before Victor could stop me. "And he's been waiting," Maya said quietly, "letting you do all the work of dissolving the criminal infrastructure so he could swoop in and rebuild it under new management." Lucien's jaw was so tight Simone thought it might crack. "He's been funding Adrian's operation this entire time," he said, "using federal agents to gather intelligence on every legitimate business connection I've built, every partner, every investor, every legal transition I've made." "Why?" Simone asked. "So he can destroy them all at once." Cale's voice was grim. "Discredit Lucien's reformation as a fraud, prove he was running criminal operations all along, then step in and reclaim control of everything with the family name rehabilitated through Lucien's public downfall. That's why Adrian wanted the Eastern European Partnership file," Maya added. "It's the one piece of evidence that could be twisted into proof of illegal arms dealing if presented without full context." Simone's mind raced through implications. "But we stopped him. Adrian's arrested. The file never got delivered." "It doesn't matter." Lucien's voice was hollow. "Victor doesn't need Adrian anymore. He has enough documentation from the last 3 years to build whatever narrative he wants. And now that Adrian's under federal protection, he can testify," Simone finished, "claim he was investigating you legitimately, that I was your accomplice, that everything you've built is criminal conspiracy dressed up as legitimate business." She looked at Lucien and saw her own horror reflected in his eyes. "He's going to destroy both of us," she said. "No." Lucien turned to face them all, and for the first time since she'd met him, Simone saw something that looked like genuine fear bleeding through the control. "He's going to destroy everything I've spent 3 years building, everyone I've protected, every person who trusted that I was different from what our father created." His voice cracked. "And he's going to do it using my own brother's name." The next 48 hours moved like warfare. Victor's attack came through legal channels first. Emergency injunctions filed in federal court claiming Lucien had used fraudulent corporate structures to launder money while posing as legitimate business. Evidence submitted included documentation that looked exactly like what Simone had been gathering for weeks, except now presented through the lens of criminal conspiracy. Then came the media. Someone leaked the story to every major news outlet in Chicago. Billionaire CEO accused of running criminal empire under cover of reform. Simone watched it break across television screens in the operations center while her stomach turned to lead. They used photos of Lucien at charity events, his father's old arrest records, testimony from anonymous federal sources claiming years of surveillance. And then, most damaging, they showed security footage of Lucien and Simone kissing in Millennium Park. The headline underneath, "Federal agent compromised by criminal target." "They're crucifying you," Maya said quietly. Simone couldn't respond, because they were right. Not about Lucien being criminal, but about her being compromised. She'd fallen for him, chosen him over protocol, helped him destroy Adrian instead of building a proper case through legal channels. Every tactical decision she'd made in the last 3 weeks could be framed as corruption if someone wanted it badly enough. And Victor clearly wanted it badly enough. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then survival instinct made her pick up. "Ms. Veyr." The voice was smooth, cultured, carrying the same quiet control she recognized from Lucien, except somehow colder. "We should talk." "Victor, you're perceptive." She could hear the smile in his voice. "My brother chose well." "What do you want?" "To offer you a way out." Victor's tone remained pleasant. "You're going to be charged with federal corruption within 72 hours. Conspiracy. Obstruction. Possibly treason, depending on how creative the prosecutors want to be. Your career is over, Ms. Veyr. Your reputation is destroyed. And all because you made the mistake of believing Lucien was actually trying to build something honest. Simone's hands were shaking. He was. Was he? Victor's voice dropped into something sharp. Or did he just need a federal agent naive enough to help him cover his tracks? Tell me, Ms. Veyr, how much of what he showed you can you actually verify independently? How much of his evidence came from sources you can authenticate without his help? Ice flooded her veins. Because she couldn't. Every document she'd reviewed had come through Lucien's private server. Every financial record had been provided by his intelligence team. Every piece of evidence exonerating him had been handed to her by the very person who had the most to gain from being exonerated. "You're lying," she said, but her voice cracked. "Am I?" Victor sounded almost sympathetic. "Or are you finally realizing that my brother is exactly what our father trained him to be? A predator smart enough to make you believe you were saving him while he was using you to destroy anyone who got too close to the truth." "No, There's a car waiting for you outside the building you are currently occupying. Black sedan, federal plates. Get in, and I'll make sure the charges against you disappear. Refuse, and you'll spend the next decade in prison wondering whether anything Lucien ever told you was real." The line went dead. Simone stood frozen in the operations center while Maya and Kael worked frantically around her, and Lucien stood at the window, staring out at Chicago like a man watching his entire world burn. Then he turned, looked directly at her, and Simone saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. Resignation. Like he already knew what she was going to choose, like he'd been waiting for this moment since the day she walked into his office. "He called you," Lucien said quietly. It wasn't a question. Simone's throat felt like it was closing. "How did you—" "Because it's what I would do." His voice remained flat. "Divide. Isolate. Make you doubt everything until the only logical choice is abandoning the losing side." He moved toward her slowly, each step measured. "So I'm going to ask you one question, Ms. Veyr, and I need you to answer honestly because both our lives depend on it." He stopped close enough that she could see the exhaustion carved into his face and the way his hands were clenched tight, like he was physically holding himself together through will alone. "Do you believe I'm who I've shown you?" Lucien asked. "Or do you believe I've been manipulating you from the beginning?" Simone looked at him, at this man she'd investigated, trusted, chosen, maybe even loved, and felt the ground dissolve beneath her feet, because she didn't know anymore. Every instinct screamed that Lucien was telling the truth, that he'd spent 3 years destroying his father's empire. That Victor was the real threat. But every piece of training she'd ever received whispered that this was exactly how expert manipulators operated, by making you believe you were seeing the truth when really you were just seeing what they needed you to see. "I don't know," she whispered. Lucien's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes died. "Then you should take Victor's offer," he said quietly, "because if you don't trust me, staying here will only destroy you faster." He turned away, walked back to the window, left her standing in the center of the operations center with Maya and Kael watching, and her entire world reduced to a single impossible choice. Trust the man who might be saving her, or trust the instincts that had kept her alive this long. Simone's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone. Then she made the only decision she had left. She walked toward the door. Kael stepped into her path. "Don't." "Move," Simone said. "If you walk out of here, Victor wins. Lucien goes to prison. Everyone connected to Vesper Global becomes a target. That's not my problem anymore. It is if you still have a soul left." Simone met his stare. "I'm trying to save what's left of it." She pushed past him, through the security doors, down the stairs, out into Chicago's cold evening air, where a black sedan with federal plates was indeed waiting exactly where Victor had promised. The door opened. A man in a suit gestured for her to get in. Simone stood on the sidewalk with her pulse hammering and her mind screaming and every fiber of her being at war with itself. Then she looked back at the building, saw Lucien standing at the window 40 feet above, watching her. Not with anger, not with betrayal, just exhaustion and acceptance and something that looked dangerously like understanding. He'd always known she might leave. He'd prepared for it, maybe even expected it, and somehow that was worse than any accusation could have been. Simone's vision blurred. Then she got into the car. The door closed. The sedan pulled away from the curb, and as Chicago blurred past the windows, Simone felt the last piece of herself that had believed in redemption finally shatter into something too broken to ever rebuild. She'd made her choice. Now she'd have to survive it. Even if surviving meant becoming exactly the kind of person she'd spent her entire career trying to destroy. The sedan drove for 20 minutes before Simone realized they weren't heading toward any federal building. They were moving south through neighborhoods that got darker with each mile, past shuttered factories and empty lots where streetlights flickered like dying stars. The man beside her in the suit hadn't spoken since she got in. His hands rested loose in his lap, but she could see the bulge of a weapon under his jacket. Not a federal agent, something else entirely. "Where are we going?" Simone asked. "Mr. Veyr wants to meet somewhere private." Ice slid down her spine. "I thought we were going to federal custody." The man smiled without warmth. "You thought wrong." Simone's hand moved toward the door handle, but the locks had engaged automatically. She was trapped in a moving vehicle with armed security heading toward an unknown location, and every tactical instinct she'd ever learned started screaming. "Let me out!" "Can't do that. Then you're kidnapping a federal agent." "Suspended federal agent," the man corrected. "Big difference." The sedan turned down an industrial access road where broken pavement gave way to gravel, and the only light came from a warehouse complex ahead. Simone could see other vehicles already parked, black SUVs with tinted windows, men standing guard with the kind of posture that came from military training or worse. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an execution site. The sedan stopped. The man got out and opened her door. "Move." Simone's legs felt like lead, but she forced herself to stand. Cold air hit her face, carrying the smell of rust and chemical waste. The guards watched her with dead eyes as she was led toward the warehouse entrance, where a single light illuminated steel doors. Inside, the space stretched out like a cathedral to decay, concrete floors, exposed beams, shadows thick enough to hide anything. And in the center, standing beneath a work light that cast his face in harsh relief, was a man who looked so much like Lucien that Simone's breath caught. Same sharp features, same dark eyes, same controlled posture. But where Lucien carried exhaustion and restraint, Victor Veyr radiated cold calculation. "Ms. Veyr." His voice was smooth, almost pleasant. "Thank you for coming. I didn't have much choice." "Everyone has choices." Victor gestured and the guards stepped back, giving them space. "You could have stayed with my brother, waited for federal charges, gone to prison believing you were on the right side." He moved closer. "Instead, you chose survival. I respect that." Simone's hands were shaking, but she locked them at her sides. "You said you'd make the charges disappear. I will, after you do something for me." "What?" Victor pulled out a tablet and held it toward her. The screen showed a live video feed, Lucien's operations center. Maya working at the terminals, Kyle standing guard, and Lucien himself at the window, still staring out at Chicago like a man waiting for the end. "Your former lover," Victor said quietly, "has spent 3 years dismantling our father's empire, burning bridges, destroying infrastructure, turning weapons into paperwork." His expression went cold. "I need you to help me rebuild what he destroyed." Simone stared at the screen. "By doing what?" "By testifying that everything Lucien showed you was fabricated, that his evidence of federal corruption was manufactured to cover his own criminal activity, that he manipulated you into destroying Adrian Cross, a legitimate federal agent, so Lucien could continue operating without oversight." The words hit like bullets. "That's not what happened, isn't it?" Victor's eyes locked onto hers. "Think carefully, Ms. Veyr. You spent 3 weeks inside Vesper Global. Did you ever independently verify any of Lucien's claims? Did you check his documentation against external sources? Or did you just accept everything he gave you because he made you feel like you were saving something?" Simone's throat felt tight. "The evidence was real. Evidence he curated specifically for you." Victor's voice remained calm. "My brother is brilliant at constructing narratives. Our father taught him that. How to make people believe they're seeing truth when they're really just seeing what you need them to see." He tapped the tablet. "Lucien showed you shell companies being dissolved, Did you verify those companies actually existed before he started closing them? He showed you offshore accounts transferring to federal seizure. Did you confirm those accounts contained criminal proceeds or just legitimate assets he was hiding? He showed you partnership documents with intelligence agencies. Did you check whether those partnerships were authorized or whether Lucien was just feeding them information to build cover? Each question landed like a blade. Because Simone couldn't answer any of them, she'd trusted Lucien's documentation, believed his narrative, accepted his version of events without doing the one thing every federal agent was trained to do: independently verify everything. "You're lying," she said, but her voice cracked. "I'm asking questions you should have asked 3 weeks ago." Victor set the tablet down. "But you didn't. Because Lucien made you believe you were partners, that you were building something together, that love could somehow overcome the fact that he's been running criminal operations under the cover of Reformation for years." He stepped closer. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to testify exactly what I need you to say. Adrian's legal team will corroborate. Federal prosecutors will build a case. And Lucien will spend the rest of his life in prison while I restore what he tried to destroy. And if I refuse?" Victor's expression didn't change. "Then you'll disappear. Your mother will have a terrible accident, and Lucien will still go to prison. He just won't have anyone left to mourn him." The threat was delivered with perfect calm. Simone's pulse roared in her ears. "You'd kill your own brother." "I'd execute a traitor who destroyed our family's legacy." Victor's voice remained flat. "There's a difference." He pulled out a document and pen. "This is a sworn statement. Sign it. Testify when called. And walk away with your life intact." Simone stared at the paper, at words that would destroy Lucien completely, erase everything he'd fought for, turn his redemption into proof of deeper corruption. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen. Then she thought about Lucien standing at that window, about the scars on his knuckles, about the exhaustion in his voice when he'd asked if she believed him, about the fact that he'd let her leave even knowing it might destroy him. Simone looked up at Victor. "No." The warehouse went silent. Victor's expression remained perfectly controlled, but something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. "Excuse me?" "I said no." Simone's voice steadied. "I'm not signing anything. I'm not testifying against Lucien. And you can threaten me all you want, but I'm not going to help you destroy an innocent man." Victor studied her for 3 long seconds. Then he nodded once. The guards moved forward, and Simone realized with sudden terrible clarity that she'd just signed her own death warrant. But before they reached her, the warehouse door exploded inward with a sound like thunder. Cale came through first. He moved like violence personified, fast, efficient, brutal, taking down the nearest guard with a strike that shattered bone before the man could draw his weapon. 2 more guards turned, but Maya was already there, moving with precision that spoke of training most people didn't survive learning. And then Lucien walked through the smoke and chaos like death given human form. He held a gun with kind of casual familiarity that made Simone's blood run cold, because this wasn't the controlled executive she'd been investigating. This was something older, darker, the part of him that had been trained by a criminal empire before he'd tried to bury it. "Victor?" Lucien's voice carried across the warehouse. "Let her go." Victor's expression remained calm, but Simone saw his hand move toward his jacket. "You brought a war to my door, brother. You declared it first." Lucien's eyes never left Victor. "The moment you bailed out Adrian, the moment you started twisting my evidence into weapons. I'm reclaiming what's ours. There is no ours, not anymore." Lucien moved closer, gun steady. "I destroyed it, all of it, and I'd do it again." Victor pulled his own weapon. The warehouse erupted. Simone dropped flat as gunfire shattered the air above her head. She scrambled behind a concrete pillar while bullets sparked off steel and men shouted, and somewhere in the chaos, she heard Kael's voice roaring orders, and Maya returning fire with mechanical precision. Then a hand grabbed her arm. Lucien pulled her behind cover, his body shielding hers, breathing hard. "You came back," she gasped. "You never left." His eyes were dark, fierce. "We've been tracking you since the moment you got in that car." "Why didn't you stop me sooner?" "Because I needed to know." He looked at her, and she saw everything raw and unguarded. Whether you'd signed Victor's statement, whether you'd choose survival over truth. And you chose truth. His voice cracked. Even when it should have killed you. More gunfire, closer now. Lucien leaned out and fired 3 rounds with terrifying accuracy. One of Victor's guards went down. Another dove for cover. "We need to move," he said. Kael cleared a path to the east exit. "What about Victor?" "He's mine." Simone grabbed his arm. "Lucien, this ends tonight." His expression went cold, one way or another. He kissed her hard, desperate, fierce, tasting like smoke and fear, then pushed her toward where Kael was providing cover fire. "Get her out," Lucien ordered. Kael nodded once. "Don't die." "I'll try." Then Lucien moved deeper into the warehouse toward where Victor had taken position, and Simone felt her heart tear straight down the center because she'd finally chosen the right side only to watch it walk toward death anyway. Kael's hand locked on her shoulder. "Move. Now." They ran through smoke and shadows while gunfire echoed off concrete, and Simone's mind screamed that she should go back, should help, should do anything except run while Lucien faced his brother alone. They burst through the exit into cold night air where Maya had a vehicle waiting. "Where is he?" Maya demanded. "Inside." Kael's voice was grim. "Finishing it." They waited. 30 seconds, 60. More gunfire inside. Then silence. Terrible, absolute silence. Simone started toward the door, but Kael held her back. "Don't! He could be—" He knew what he was doing. Then the door opened and Lucien walked out, blood on his suit, face pale, gun hanging loose at his side, alive. Simone's legs gave out, but he caught her, arms wrapping tight, holding her upright while she gasped against his chest and felt his heartbeat hammering through expensive fabric. "Victor?" Maya asked quietly. "Alive." Lucien's voice was hollow. "Federal custody. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison." "And Adrian?" Singing like a canary the moment Victor's arrest was confirmed, gave up every name, every transaction, every piece of his operation in exchange for reduced charges. Kael actually smiled. "So we won." "No." Lucien pulled back from Simone, looked at her with exhausted eyes. "We survived. There's a difference." The safe house was in Evanston, suburban anonymity wrapped in security protocols that made Blackmere Tower look amateur. They arrived at 3 a.m. while Chicago burned itself out in the distance. Federal prosecutors had already started filing charges against Victor's network. Adrian's testimony was being documented under protective custody, and the media was having a field day with headlines about criminal dynasties and federal corruption and love affairs that had somehow survived multiple attempts at destruction. Simone sat on a couch that cost more than her rent and stared at nothing while her mind tried to process the last 72 hours. Lucien emerged from the bedroom wearing clean clothes, hair damp from the shower, moving like every muscle hurt. He sat beside her without speaking. They stayed like that for a long time, just breathing, just existing, just surviving the aftermath. Finally, Simone said, "You let me walk away?" "Yes." "Even though you knew Victor would try to kill me." "I knew we'd get there in time." Lucien's voice was rough. "Kael had tracking on you the moment you left. We were 30 seconds behind the entire drive. But you let me make the choice, because anything else would have been control." He looked at her. "And I promised myself I'd never become my father." Simone's eyes burned. "I doubted you." "You should have." Lucien's hand found hers, scarred fingers threading through. "Doubt is what keeps you alive. Trust is what gets you killed." "Then why did you trust me?" "Because some things are worth dying for." The simplicity of it broke something in Simone's chest. She turned toward him and saw exhaustion carved into every line of his face, the weight of 3 years spent dismantling an empire alone, of carrying his father's sins, of choosing redemption over survival at every possible turn. "What happens now?" she whispered. Lucien was quiet for a long moment. "Federal prosecutors want your testimony. About Adrian, about Victor, about everything you witnessed inside Vesper Global." "Will they charge you?" "Probably." His voice remained flat. "Doesn't matter if it's legitimate or not. The damage is done. Vesper's reputation is destroyed. Every partner will pull their contracts. Every investor will run. So you lost everything. Lost. No. He looked at her and something shifted in his expression. I lost my father's empire. Finally. Completely. No resurrection possible. That's what you wanted? Yes. Then why do you look like you're grieving? Lucien's jaw tightened. Because destroying something doesn't mean you didn't love it once. And because I'm about to lose you too. Simone's breath caught. What? Your career's over, Simone. Federal agent who fell for her target, helped destroy a legitimate investigation, got people killed. Even if charges don't stick, you'll never work in law enforcement again. His hand tightened on hers. And you deserve better than being collateral damage in my family's war. Simone stared at him, at this man who'd been trained as a weapon and chose to be something else, who'd carried impossible weight without breaking, who'd survived by being exactly what his father taught him not to be. What if I don't want better? She said quietly. Lucien's eyes met hers. What if I want this? Simone continued. You. This mess, whatever comes next. It's going to be legal battles for years. Testimony, hearings, media, your name dragged through every possible mud. I know. Your mother will be questioned, your entire life examined. Nothing will be private anymore. I know. And at the end of it, Lucien's voice cracked. I might still go to prison, and you'll have given up everything for nothing. Simone reached up and touched his face with shaking hands. 3 weeks ago, she said, I walked into your office believing you were a monster, that I'd gather evidence, destroy you, and call it justice. And now? Now I know you're just a man trying to survive the weight of someone else's sins. Her eyes burned. And I'd rather stand with you through every battle than walk away and spend the rest of my life wondering if I abandoned the only honest thing I've ever found. Lucien stared at her like she'd just said something in a language he'd forgotten existed. Then he kissed her, not desperate this time, not fierce, just honest, raw, and unguarded, and carrying every question neither of them could answer about whether love was enough to survive the ruins they'd built together. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. I don't know how to do this, he whispered. How to be something other than what I was trained to be. Neither do I. Then we figure it out together. Together, Simone agreed. Outside, dawn started breaking across Chicago. Slow, cold, beautiful. In the way mornings are when you've survived the night against every possible odd. And somewhere in the distance, federal prosecutors were building cases that would define both their futures. But right now, in this moment, they were just two people who'd been weapons aimed at each other and chose instead to lower their guards long enough to see what existed underneath. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a beginning, and sometimes beginning was enough. The call came at 6 a.m. Maya's voice was tight when Lucien answered. We have a problem. Lucien's expression went cold. What kind? Victor posted bail. The room went silent. That's impossible, Kael said from the doorway. Federal conspiracy and attempted murder. No judge would... Someone did. Maya's voice carried through the speaker. Bail was posted an hour ago. Victor walked out of federal custody 20 minutes ago. Simone felt ice flood her veins. How? We're still tracking it, but the payment came from somewhere overseas. Shell Corporation we haven't identified yet. Which means Victor has allies we don't know about, Lucien said quietly. Allies with enough reach to corrupt federal judges. Or enough dirt to blackmail them, Maya countered. Kael's jaw was tight. He's going to come for us. Not us. Lucien looked at Simone and she saw absolute certainty in his eyes. Her. Why? Because she's the only witness who can testify that Victor tried to coerce false testimony. Without her, it's just my word against his, and my word doesn't mean much to a jury anymore. Simone's hands were shaking. So what do we do? Lucien stood, moved to the window, stared out at suburban morning light. When he turned back, his expression carried something Simone had never seen before. Decision, final and absolute. We end this, he said quietly. Tonight. No more legal battles, no more testimony, no more waiting for the system to protect us. How? Simone asked. Lucien's eyes locked onto hers. By giving Victor exactly what he wants. The plan was simple, dangerously, impossibly simple. Simone would contact Victor, offer to meet, claim she'd changed her mind about testifying and wanted to negotiate immunity in exchange for turning on Lucien. Victor would come, not to negotiate, but to eliminate the one remaining threat to his freedom. And when he did, they'd have everything documented, recorded, witnessed by federal agents who weren't corrupted. It's suicide, Maya said flatly. It's the only move left, Lucien countered. He'll kill her the moment she's alone with him. She won't be alone. Kyle was already pulling up tactical maps. We'll have overwatch, backup, full surveillance. Against Victor's security team? Maya's voice rose. He'll bring an army. Then we bring a bigger one. They argued for an hour while dawn turned to morning and Chicago woke up outside, and Simone sat in the center of it all feeling like a chess piece being moved into position for a final gambit no one would survive. Finally, she spoke. I'll do it. Everyone stopped. Lucien turned slowly. Simone, this is my choice. Her voice was steady. Victor threatened my mother, used me as a weapon, tried to destroy you through me. I'm not going to sit in a safe house while other people fight my battles. This isn't your battle. Yes, it is. She stood, met his stare directly. The moment I chose you over survival, I made it mine. So stop trying to protect me and let me finish what we started. Lucien stared at her for a long moment, then nodded once. Where? Kyle asked. Simone thought for 3 seconds. Blackmere Tower, she said. 47th floor, Lucien's office. That's Victor's advantage, Maya said. He'll control the building. No. Simone's mind was racing now. He'll think he does, but it's Lucien's territory. And if we're smart, we turn his arrogance into a trap, Lucien finished. Their eyes met across the room, and Simone saw understanding flash between them like lightning. Tonight, Lucien said. Midnight. Are you insane? Maya demanded. Probably. He pulled out his phone. But insanity's the only thing Victor won't expect. He started making calls, and as morning light flooded the safe house, Simone felt the final pieces of something inevitable slot into place. They were done running, done hiding, done letting Victor define the battlefield. Tonight, they'd end it, or die trying. And somehow, standing in that moment with Lucien's voice calm and certain, and Kael's tactical mind already 3 steps ahead, and Maya's fierce loyalty burning like fire, Simone realized she wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready. For war. For truth. For whatever came next. Together. Midnight came to Chicago like a held breath. Simone stood in the lobby of Blackmere Tower, wearing a wire so sophisticated she couldn't feel it against her skin and carrying enough fear in her chest to drown in. The building was empty, officially closed for the night, security rotations altered through carefully placed bribes, cameras looped to show nothing but static darkness on 47 floors of steel and glass. Kael was positioned 3 floors above, with a rifle and sightlines that covered every approach. Maya had commandeered the building's central server room, controlling what remained of the digital infrastructure. And somewhere in the shadows, federal agents waited with warrants and recording equipment, ready to move the moment Victor incriminated himself. But all of that felt distant, theoretical. What felt real was Lucien's hand on her shoulder in the seconds before she'd walked through those glass doors. You can still walk away, he'd said quietly. So can you. No. His eyes had been dark, certain. I stopped being able to walk away the moment you asked me if I was worth saving. And am I? Simone had whispered. Worth saving. Lucien had touched her face with scarred fingers. You're the only thing I've found in 3 years that made surviving feel like something other than punishment. Then he'd kissed her, careful, desperate, final, and disappeared into the building's infrastructure to wait. Now Simone stood alone in the vast lobby and listened to her own heartbeat counting down the seconds until Victor arrived. Her phone buzzed. I'm here. Come to the 47th floor. Alone. Simone's hands were steady when she typed back. On my way. The elevator rose through darkness and silence while her pulse hammered and every instinct screamed that she was climbing toward her own execution. But she'd made this choice, demanded it even, because some things were worth dying for. and stopping Victor Veyr from destroying everything Lucien had fought to build was one of them. The doors opened onto the executive floor. It looked different at midnight, shadows thick enough to hide anything, Chicago's lights bleeding through windows like distant stars, the air carrying a coldness that had nothing to do with temperature. Victor stood at the center of it all. He looked exactly like his brother, same sharp features, same dark eyes, same controlled posture, but where Lucien carried exhaustion and restraint, Victor radiated something predatory. "Ms. Vale." His voice was smooth. "You came. You didn't give me much choice." "Everyone has choices." Victor gestured toward Lucien's office. "Shall we?" Simone walked past him, every nerve screaming awareness of how close he was, how easily he could end this before it even started. But Victor followed calmly, almost pleasantly, like they were just having a conversation instead of positioning themselves for mutual destruction. Inside the office, Victor closed the door. The sound of it latching felt like a cell locking. "So," he said, moving to Lucien's desk and sitting behind it like he already owned the space, "you've reconsidered your position." "I've reconsidered my survival odds." Simone kept her voice level. "Adrian's testifying against you. Federal prosecutors have documentation of the bail fraud, and my testimony puts you at that warehouse trying to coerce false statements, all of which disappears if you're not around to give it." "Killing me doesn't solve your problem," Simone said. "It creates new ones." Victor smiled. "Does it?" "Yes, because the moment I die, every piece of evidence Lucien's been holding back gets released. Financial records, communication logs, documentation of your attempts to rebuild the criminal network. All of it goes to federal prosecutors, international law enforcement, and media outlets simultaneously." She moved closer to the desk. "But if I testify that Lucien manipulated the investigation, that his evidence was fabricated, that I was compromised, your legal problems go away. Adrian becomes a victim. You become a concerned brother trying to stop a criminal, and Lucien goes to prison while you walk free." Victor studied her for a long moment. "You're offering to destroy him." "I'm offering to survive." Simone's voice didn't waver. "You taught me that choice. Now I'm making it. What do you want in exchange?" "Immunity, protection for my mother, and enough money to disappear." "How much?" $5 million. Victor actually laughed, cold, brief. "You're cheaper than I expected." "I'm practical." Simone held his stare. "Do we have a deal?" Victor leaned back in Lucien's chair, fingers steepled, eyes calculating. Then he pulled out a gun and set it on the desk between them. "Here's my counteroffer," he said quietly. "You sign the statement I prepared. You testify exactly as instructed. And in exchange, I don't kill you tonight." The room went cold. "That wasn't the deal," Simone said. "There is no deal." Victor's expression remained calm. "You're going to do exactly what I need because the alternative is dying in this office and having your mother join you before morning." He stood, moved around the desk, picked up the gun with casual familiarity. "My brother made you believe redemption was possible, that people could change, that love somehow made weapons into something softer." He stopped close enough that Simone could see the absolute certainty in his eyes. "But we're what our father made us, Ms. Vale. Lucien just spent 3 years pretending otherwise, and now you're going to help me prove it." Simone's breath was coming faster now. "He'll never stop fighting you." "He will when you're gone." Victor raised the gun. "Because Lucien's weakness has always been caring too much. And you, unfortunately, became the thing he cared about most." The safety clicked off. Simone closed her eyes. Then the office windows exploded inward with a sound like the world ending. Kale came through the glass in a controlled fall that turned into a combat roll, rifle already tracking toward Victor before he hit the ground. At the same moment, the office door burst open and Lucien walked in with a gun steady in his hands and murder written across his face. Victor spun toward the movement, but Simone was already moving, 3 years of federal combat training translating into muscle memory, as she grabbed his wrist and twisted hard enough to hear bone crack. The gun fell. Victor's fist caught her jaw and the world went white with pain, but she held on, drove her knee into his ribs, felt him stumble back. Then Lucien was there. He hit Victor with the kind of violence that came from years of restraint finally breaking. They went down hard, crashing through furniture, both fighting with the brutal efficiency of men trained by the same predator. "Federal agents!" Voices from the hallway. "Drop your weapons!" But neither brother was listening. They fought like the war had always been inevitable, like 3 years of separation had just been waiting for this moment when everything finally came down to blood and choice, and which son would survive carrying their father's sins. Lucien got Victor pinned against the desk, forearm pressed against his throat, eyes dark with fury. "You could have walked away," Lucien said through clenched teeth. "Built something new. Been anything except this." Victor's face was turning red, but he smiled anyway. "We're the same. We'll always be the same." "No," Lucien's voice cracked. "I chose different. You chose weakness. I chose her." Lucien pressed harder. "And I'd burn everything our father built 1,000 times to keep that choice." Victor's eyes were wild now, desperate. "Then you've already lost." His hand moved fast, impossibly fast, toward something hidden at his ankle. A second gun, rising toward Lucien's chest. And Simone saw with terrible clarity that neither federal agents nor backup nor surveillance would matter, because in 2 seconds Lucien would be dead, and Victor would claim self-defense, and everything would have been for nothing. So she made the only choice left. She grabbed the first gun from where it had fallen, raised it, and fired. The shot echoed through the office like thunder. Victor's body jerked once, then went still. The gun fell from his hand, and Lucien stared at Simone with an expression that held shock and grief, and something that looked dangerously close to relief. Federal agents flooded the room, shouting orders, securing weapons, calling for medical, but Simone barely heard them. She was staring at her hands, at the gun, at Victor's body, at the choice she'd just made that couldn't be unmade. Then Lucien's arms wrapped around her and she collapsed against him while her entire body shook, and the reality of what she'd done hit like drowning. "You're okay," he said, roughly against her hair. "You're safe. It's over." But Simone couldn't stop shaking, because it wasn't over. It would never be over. She'd killed a man, saved another, and crossed a line there was no coming back from. The interrogation lasted 14 hours. Federal agents, internal affairs, prosecutors from 3 different jurisdictions, all asking the same questions in different configurations while Simone sat in that same windowless room and recounted every detail of the last 3 weeks until the words stopped meaning anything. Finally, a woman in a severe suit sat across from her. "Ms. Veyr, we've reviewed the evidence, the wire recording, surveillance footage, testimony from the federal agents present, and Mr. Veyr's statement." She set down a file. "Victor Veyr was attempting to murder both you and his brother when you fired in defense of Mr. Lucien Veyr's life. The shooting is ruled justified." Simone's throat felt like sand. "What about charges against me?" "For what?" "Federal corruption, conspiracy, everything Adrian accused me of." The woman's expression softened slightly. "Adrian Cross is facing 40 years in federal prison for fraud, extortion, and abuse of authority. His testimony against you has no credibility, and every piece of evidence you gathered against Lucien Veyr has been verified as legitimate documentation of his efforts to dismantle his father's criminal empire." She leaned forward. "You're not being charged, Ms. Veyr. You're being cleared." The words didn't feel real. "My career is over as a federal agent, yes, but the Justice Department is offering you a position as a civilian consultant on financial crimes. Full benefits, clean record, and a formal apology for everything Adrian put you through." Simone stared at the file. "Why?" "Because you did exactly what federal agents are supposed to do, pursue truth regardless of personal cost. That's rare enough to be worth protecting." The woman stood. "You're free to go, Ms. Veyr, and for what it's worth, I'm sorry this happened to you." Then she walked out, leaving Simone alone with paperwork that said she'd survived, and a truth she couldn't quite believe. Lucien was waiting outside the federal building. He looked like he'd been awake for days. Suit rumpled, shadows carved deep beneath his eyes, hands shoved in his pockets like he didn't trust what they might do if left free. When he saw Simone, something in his expression broke. She walked to him slowly, each step feeling like moving through water. They stood 3 feet apart while Chicago moved around them. Morning traffic, pedestrians, life continuing like the world hadn't just tilted sideways. I killed your brother, Simone said quietly. You saved my life. Both can be true. Lucien's jaw tightened. Victor made his choices. He knew exactly what he was walking into. Does that make it easier? No, his voice cracked. But it makes it survivable. Simone looked at him, at this man she'd investigated, trusted, chosen, killed for, and felt the enormity of everything that had happened settle like lead in her chest. What happens now? She whispered. Lucien was quiet for a long moment. Vesper Global is finished, he said finally. Every partner withdrew. Every investor pulled out. The company's being dissolved and assets liquidated to cover legal fees and settlements. I'm sorry. Don't be. He looked at her. I spent 3 years trying to destroy my father's legacy. Victor just finished the job. So you have nothing left? No. Lucien moved closer, each step deliberate. I have something I've never had before. Freedom. He reached up slowly and touched her face with scarred fingers. My father built an empire through violence because he thought power was the only thing worth surviving for. I spent 3 years learning he was wrong, that some things, some people, matter more than legacy or reputation or control. His eyes locked onto hers. You matter more, Simone, than all of it. Simone's vision blurred. I don't know how to do this, how to be normal after everything that happened. Neither do I, Lucien's voice softened. But we figure it out together. Together, Simone repeated. And when he kissed her right there on the steps of the federal building with morning sun breaking through Chicago's skyline and everything they'd ever known reduced to ruins around them, Simone kissed him back and tasted salt and exhaustion and something that felt dangerously close to hope. They'd both been weapons, both been broken, both been rebuilt into something that didn't quite fit the world they'd been born into. But maybe that was okay. Maybe survival didn't require fitting. Maybe it just required finding someone who understood what it cost to keep breathing when everything inside you wanted to stop. Check. 6 months later, Chicago looked different. Cleaner, somehow. Lighter. Or maybe Simone had just learned to see it through eyes that weren't constantly calculating threats. She stood in an unfinished building in Westtown, 3 floors of exposed brick and dusty windows, and potential stretched out like a promise. Lucien had bought it quietly, using what remained of his personal assets after legal fees and settlements had consumed everything else. Community center, he'd said when showing her the plans. Workforce training, legal aid, youth programs. Something that actually helps instead of just taking. Now he stood in the center of the main floor, reviewing construction plans with an architect while afternoon light poured through windows that hadn't been cleaned yet and dust motes drifted like snow. Simone watched him from the doorway. He looked different now, still sharp, still controlled, but carrying himself with something closer to peace. The exhaustion had faded. The shadows under his eyes had lightened. He smiled occasionally when he thought no one was watching. He'd stopped surviving and started living. They both had. Simone had taken the Justice Department's consulting position and discovered she was good at teaching other agents how to recognize corruption before it destroyed them. Her mother had come out of protective custody with more questions than Simone could answer, but they were rebuilding that relationship slowly. Coffee on Sundays, phone calls that didn't feel forced, forgiveness that came in small increments. And at night, when Chicago's noise faded and darkness pressed against windows, Simone and Lucien lay tangled together in his apartment and didn't talk about the past. They talked about the center, about programs they wanted to build, about kids who needed someone to believe they could become something other than what violence had tried to make them. They talked about the future like it was something they'd earned instead of something they'd stolen. You're staring, Lucien said without looking up from the plans. Simone smiled. I'm appreciating. Appreciating what? The fact that you're still here. He turned then, and the expression on his face held everything words couldn't carry, gratitude and grief, and love wrapped so tight together they couldn't be separated. Where else would I be? He asked quietly. Simone crossed the dusty floor until she stood close enough to touch him. Building another empire, running from prosecutors, hiding behind corporate structures. I'm done hiding. Lucien's hand found hers. Turns out being seen is less terrifying than I thought. Even when what they see isn't perfect? especially then. He pulled her closer, and Simone let herself lean into him, into warmth and steadiness and the slow realization that survival didn't have to mean isolation. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucien asked against her hair. "Everything you gave up?" Simone thought about her federal badge, about the career she'd destroyed, about the clean certainty of believing the world divided neatly into heroes and criminals. "No," she said, "because what I found was better." "What did you find?" "Someone who chose to be different even when it would have been easier to stay the same." She pulled back enough to look at him. "Someone who taught me that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about refusing to let the past define the future." Lucien's eyes were bright. "You taught me that too." They stood in the center of the unfinished building while dust settled around them, and Chicago hummed beyond the windows, and the future stretched out, uncertain, but possible. Not perfect, not easy, but honest. And after everything they'd survived, the lies, the violence, the choices that left scars deeper than skin, honest felt like enough. More than enough. It felt like home. That night, Simone stood on the balcony of Lucien's apartment and watched the city lights flicker through the darkness below. Somewhere out there, federal prosecutors were still building cases against the last remnants of Adrian's network. Maya had taken a position with a private security firm, using her intelligence skills to protect instead of attack. Kael had disappeared quietly, the way men like him always did when wars ended and peace became more dangerous than combat. And Victor's funeral had been small, private, attended only by Lucien and a handful of people who'd known the boy he'd been before their father's empire had turned him into something else. Simone had asked if Lucien wanted her there. He'd said no. "Some ghosts," he'd told her quietly, "you have to bury alone." But he'd come back to her afterward with red eyes and steady hands, and let her hold him while he grieved for the brother who might have been if their father had chosen different. Now Lucien emerged onto the balcony carrying 2 glasses of whiskey and looking like a man who'd finally learned to breathe without counting the cost. "You're thinking too loud," he said, handing her a glass. "Just remembering?" "Remembering what?" "The first time I walked into your office." Simone took a sip, felt the burn settle warm in her chest. "I was so certain I knew exactly who you were. And now? Now I know I didn't understand anything." She looked at him. "About you, about myself, about what it actually takes to survive carrying someone else's sins." Lucien was quiet for a moment. "My father used to say that power was the only thing that lasted, that everything else, love, loyalty, trust, was just weakness waiting to be exploited. Do you believe that?" "I used to." He set down his glass and turned toward her. "But then I met someone who looked at me like I was worth saving, even when every piece of evidence said otherwise. Someone who chose truth over survival. Someone who taught me that the strongest thing you can do is let yourself be vulnerable enough to build something, instead of just destroying." His hand found hers in the darkness. "So no, I don't believe it anymore, because you proved my father wrong just by existing." Simone's throat felt tight. "I'm not that strong." "Yes, you are." Lucien's voice was certain. "You just don't see it yet." They stood together on the balcony while Chicago spread out beneath them. A city built on ambition and violence and the stubborn refusal to stop reaching for something better, even when better seemed impossible. And Simone realized with sudden, perfect clarity that she'd been wrong about everything. Love wasn't the weakness her training had warned her about. It was the only thing strong enough to survive becoming a weapon. "I love you," she said quietly. Lucien went absolutely still. Then he smiled. Not the controlled expression he showed the world, but something raw and unguarded that made him look younger than his years. "I love you too," he said, "even though it terrifies me." "Good." Simone moved closer. "Terrified means we're still alive." "Then let's stay terrified together." He kissed her while the city lights flickered below, and the future waited uncertain, and the past finally loosened its grip on both of them. They'd been weapons aimed at each other. They'd been broken by systems designed to destroy anything that didn't fit. They'd been alone for so long that learning to trust felt like learning a language they'd forgotten ever existed. But they were learning, slowly, imperfectly, honestly. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Because survival without connection was just existence. But survival with someone who understood the cost, who'd paid it themselves and kept breathing anyway, that was life. Real, messy, beautiful life. And as dawn started breaking across Chicago's skyline, Simone and Lucien stood together on that balcony and watched the darkness give way to light. Not perfectly, not easily, but inevitably. The way all endings become beginnings if you're brave enough to let them. And they were. Finally. Completely. Brave enough to start.